I gave her everything I had, and I still wasn't enough. Maybe I should have known. Maybe the signs were there. But when you're lonely, you'll believe anything that feels like love. Her name was Sampriya, and she was the best thing that ever happened to me, until she wasn't. A few nights ago, I got an email from a long-time viewer of this channel. He told me he's been watching quietly for months, just listening, trying to understand how his own story unraveled the way it did. He wrote, "I thought she saved me, but now I realize I was just her safety net." That line cut through me. I closed the email and just sat there, staring out the window. Not sad, not angry, just hollow. Because I've felt that exact same shift when the warmth fades and you're left wondering if any of it was real or if you were just a pit stop on someone else's road to something better. It's a different kind of pain. Not loud, just constant. That email reminded me that this channel isn't just about what I went through. It's about what we are still trying to make sense of together. Guys who gave their hearts thinking it was safe to do so. Guys who thought love would feel like healing, but ended up learning something much harder. If you're watching this, and even a small part of this story sounds familiar, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Leave a comment. Let me know where you're watching from. I read everyone. And to those of you who keep coming back, thank you. Truly. Your support, your honesty, your presence here, it means the world. You've helped turn this small channel into a place where truth feels okay to speak. So if you've ever been left wondering why your best still wasn't enough, let me take you back to where it all started. I can still feel the sand between my toes from that evening in Phuket. The sun was bleeding orange across the water, and Sompriya's head rested against my shoulder like it belonged there. I was 66 years old, and for the first time in decades, I felt alive. "You're quiet tonight," she whispered, her voice soft as the evening breeze. I turned to look at her face, still amazed that someone so beautiful could choose to sit beside me. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," I said, meaning every word. She smiled that gentle smile that made my chest tight. "Lucky? You work so hard for everything, Martin. You deserve happiness." The way she said my name, with that slight accent that made even ordinary words sound musical, it made me believe I was worth something again. I'd been in Thailand for 8 months by then. My divorce back in Manchester had left me hollow, questioning everything about myself. Sarah had called me boring, predictable, emotionally unavailable. Maybe she was right. But here, sitting with Sampriya as the waves whispered against the shore, I didn't feel boring. I felt necessary. "I extended my visa today," I told her, watching her dark eyes light up. "Really? For how long?" "Another year. Maybe longer if things keep going like this." She turned her whole body toward me, those delicate hands finding mine. "What things?" she asked, though we both knew. "This. Us. Whatever we're building here." I squeezed her fingers, feeling the calluses from her work at the hotel. She worked so hard, always helping others. Her mother, her niece, anyone who needed her. It's what drew me to her first, that selfless heart. "I've been thinking too," she said, her voice dropping to that intimate tone that made me lean closer. "About us moving in together. About making this real." My heart hammered against my ribs. At my age, you don't expect second chances. You don't expect someone to look at your gray hair and weathered hands and see potential instead of just an old man. "Are you sure? I mean, I'm not exactly a catch anymore." She pressed her palm against my cheek, and I closed my eyes, memorizing the warmth. "You're the kindest man I've ever known, Martin. You see me. Not just what I look like, but who I am inside." The waves crashed louder, as if applauding her words. "I see someone incredible," I whispered back. "Someone who deserves everything good in this world." We sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the sun disappear into the horizon. I thought about my condo, how empty it had felt before she started staying over on weekends. I thought about waking up next to her, making breakfast together, planning trips to the islands. For the first time since Sarah left, I could picture a future that didn't involve me sitting alone, wondering where the years had gone. The sunset's almost gone, Sompriya said, but she wasn't looking at the sky. She was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something vulnerable and distant at the same time. There'll be another one tomorrow, I said, and hopefully we'll watch it together. She smiled again, but this time it seemed fragile, like glass that might shatter if I looked too hard. Yes, she said softly, together. As we walked back to my motorbike, her hand slipped into mine so naturally I almost forgot I'd ever questioned whether someone like her could care about someone like me. The evening air was warm and thick with promise. I was already planning how to surprise her, maybe with a nice dinner to celebrate our decision to move in together. I wanted to do everything right this time. I wanted to be the man she deserved, the kind of partner who anticipated needs before they were spoken. Martin, she said as I started the engine, thank you for today, for listening, for understanding. I didn't know what she meant then, but I nodded anyway, drunk on the possibility of us. The cooking class was Greg's idea. You can't live on takeout forever, mate, he'd said over beers at the expat bar. Learn to make something decent. Meet some people while you're at it. I almost didn't go. Walking into that little kitchen space in Old Town, seeing all those couples and younger people chatting easily, I felt ancient and out of place. Then she sat down beside me. I was struggling with a cleaver, trying to julienne vegetables like the instructor had shown us, making a complete mess of it. Like this? She said gently, her fingers covering mine as she guided my hand. Let the knife do the work. Her touch was electric, but her voice was patient, like she taught clumsy foreigners every day. I'm Martin, I said when we took a break, suddenly aware of how sweaty my palms were. Sompriya, she replied, and when she smiled for the first time, I felt something shift inside my chest. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, though she was stunning in that effortless way some women have. It was the kindness in her eyes, the way she didn't make me feel foolish for being twice her age and half as skilled. You're new to Thailand? She asked, passing me a towel. 8 weeks now, still figuring everything out. What brought you here? The question every expat gets, and I'd practice my casual answer about adventure and new experiences. But looking at her genuine interest, I found myself telling the truth. Divorce. Needed somewhere to heal, I suppose. She nodded without pity or awkwardness, just understanding. Healing takes time. Thailand is good for that. The way she said it made me think she knew something about healing, too. We spent the rest of the class working together, her correcting my technique with gentle touches and soft laughter when I inevitably messed up. She had this way of making mistakes feel like learning instead of failure. When the instructor announced we'd made green curry, I looked at our bowls and couldn't believe I'd helped create something that actually looked edible. Not bad for your first try? Sompriya said, tasting a spoonful. The chef might have helped a little, I admitted, making her laugh again. That sound became my new favorite thing. Would you like to get coffee? I asked as we cleaned up, my heart pounding like a teenager's. She hesitated for just a moment, and I braced myself for the polite rejection. I know a quiet place nearby, she said instead, and I had to fight to keep the relief off my face. The coffee shop was small and dimly lit, the kind of place locals went to escape the tourist crowds. We talked for 2 hours. She told me about her job as a personal assistant for a boutique hotel owner, how she'd grown up in a small village north of Bangkok, how she'd moved to Phuket to help support her family. My mother raised me alone after my father died, she explained, stirring sugar into her coffee. She worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. Now it's my turn to take care of her. The love in her voice when she talked about her mother made my chest ache with longing. Sarah had always complained about my family, called them needy and backward. But Sompriya spoke about responsibility like it was a privilege. You're a good daughter, I said, meaning it completely. I try to be. My niece too. She's starting university next year. Smart girl, but tuition is expensive. She wasn't asking for anything, just sharing her world with me. But I found myself wanting to help, to be part of that circle of care she'd built around the people she loved. "What about you?" she asked. "Any children?" "No. Sarah, my ex-wife, she didn't want them. Said I'd be a terrible father anyway." The words came out more bitter than I intended. Sompriya's hand found mine across the small table. "She was wrong. I can see your heart, Martin. You have so much love to give." The way she said it, with such certainty, made me believe it might be true. We met for coffee again the next week, then dinner the week after that. She always insisted on paying her share, which made me respect her even more. But when she mentioned her mother needed medication that wasn't covered by the government program, I offered to help. "Only if you can," she said, her eyes downcast. "I hate asking, but the doctors say it's important." I pressed 5,000 baht into her hand, more money than I'd spent on myself in weeks. "Family takes care of family," I said, surprising myself with the word. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Martin. You don't know what this means." But I was beginning to understand what it meant to me. It meant I mattered again. 3 months later, Sompriya had practically moved into my condo. Her toothbrush sat next to mine in the bathroom holder, her clothes hung in half my closet, and the refrigerator was actually full of real food instead of just beer and leftover pad thai. I'd wake up to the smell of jasmine rice and fresh fruit, find her humming while she cooked breakfast in one of my old t-shirts that somehow looked better on her than it ever had on me. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she'd say, kissing my cheek as I stumbled toward the coffee maker. These were the moments that made me forget about the 20 years between us, forget about all the reasons this shouldn't work. We fell into routines that felt like we'd been together for decades instead of months. Saturday morning markets, where she'd teach me to bargain in broken Thai while vendors smiled at the silly Farang trying to impress his girlfriend. Evening walks along the beach, her hand tucked into the crook of my arm like we were teenagers instead of a middle-aged man and a woman young enough to be his daughter. "You're learning to relax," she said one evening as we watched the sunset from my balcony. "When I first met you, your shoulders were always up here." She gestured near her ears, making me laugh. "Stress from the divorce, I suppose. You've helped me let go of a lot of that." She curled against my side, her head finding that perfect spot on my shoulder. "Good. Life is too short for carrying old pain." The trip to Chiang Mai was my idea. I wanted to show her off, if I'm being honest. Wanted to play the part of the successful retiree with his beautiful girlfriend, staying in nice hotels and eating at restaurants I couldn't have afforded back in Manchester. She was excited about the temples, the night markets, the cooking classes we'd planned. On our second day, we were browsing a street market when her friend Ploy appeared out of nowhere, embracing Sompriya like they were sisters. "Ploy, this is Martin," Sompriya said, her arm slipping around my waist. "My husband." The word hit me like a physical thing, warm and solid and real. I stood straighter, smiled wider, felt my chest puff with pride. Husband. Not boyfriend, not friend, not sugar daddy, husband. But as we walked away from Ploy, I noticed Sompriya's hand drop from mine. When I reached for it again, she pulled away gently, pretending to adjust her purse strap. "Everything okay?" I asked, confused by the sudden distance. "Of course, just tired from walking." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes the way it usually did. At dinner that night, I brought it up. "You called me your husband today," she blushed, looking down at her plate. "I'm sorry, it just came out. We've been together so much, it feels natural." "I liked it," I said quickly. "I liked it a lot, actually." She looked up then, something unreadable in her expression. "Thai culture. It's complicated. We don't show affection in public much. It's considered private, intimate, not for everyone to see." I nodded, trying to understand. "So when you don't hold my hand out there, it's not because you're embarrassed?" "Never embarrassed," she said firmly. "Shy, maybe, traditional. I was raised to keep personal things personal. It made sense, I told myself. Cultural differences. I was probably being too Western, too demanding. That night in our hotel room, she was tender and loving, erasing any doubts I might have had. But over the following weeks, I started noticing things. How she'd step away when other expats approached us at restaurants. How she'd go quiet when I suggested meeting her friends. How she preferred staying in to going out, as if being seen together made her uncomfortable. "It's not you," she assured me, when I finally worked up the courage to ask directly. "It's them. Thai people, they gossip. They see older foreign man with younger Thai woman. They make assumptions. Ugly assumptions." Her voice carried pain that made me want to protect her from every judging stare, every whispered comment. "They don't know us," I said, pulling her close. "They don't know how good we are together." She kissed me then, soft and grateful. "You understand me better than anyone ever has." But even as she said it, even as I held her warm body against mine, something small and cold had planted itself in my chest. A seed of doubt I couldn't quite name, couldn't quite ignore, no matter how hard I tried. The first time it happened, I almost didn't think twice about it. Sompriya kissed me goodbye after lunch, said she needed to run errands, buy groceries, maybe visit the pharmacy. Normal afternoon stuff. "I'll make us that massaman curry tonight," she promised, her hand lingering on my chest. "The one you love." I was looking forward to it, had even picked up a bottle of wine to go with dinner. By 7 o'clock, I was hungry. By 9, I was worried. By midnight, when her phone went straight to voicemail for the dozenth time, I was pacing my condo like a caged animal. She came home the next morning looking exhausted, her clothes wrinkled, her usual bright smile replaced by something strained and apologetic. "I'm so sorry, Martin. My mother, she had chest pains. I had to take her to the hospital in Patong." The words tumbled out of her in a rush, like she'd been practicing them. Her phone was broken, mine died, and I couldn't leave her alone. You know how she gets scared in hospitals. I pulled her into my arms, relief flooding through me so hard my knees nearly buckled. "Is she okay? Do you need money for treatment?" "She's fine now, just stress," the doctor said. "But thank you for offering." She kissed my neck, and I felt foolish for doubting her even for a second. But it started happening more often. Quick trips that stretched into overnight disappearances. Family emergencies that seemed to strike every few weeks. Her phone dying at the most inconvenient times. "My cousin needs help moving," she'd explain, or "My niece had an accident at school," or "My mother's neighbor is having problems with her boyfriend." Always something that required her immediate attention. Always something that kept her away until morning. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But Greg wasn't making it easy. "Mate, I've been here 5 years," he said over our weekly beer, his weathered face serious. "Thai women, they're family-oriented, sure. But this much drama? Every week?" I bristled at his implication. "You don't know her like I do, Greg. She's got a big heart. People depend on her." "I'm sure they do," he said carefully. "Just maybe slow down a bit, yeah? You've been here less than a year. There's things you don't understand yet about how it works here." His words stung because part of me was already thinking the same things. But when I looked at Sompriya, when she curled up next to me and whispered how grateful she was to have me, how safe I made her feel, those doubts seemed petty and paranoid. The money request started small and reasonable. Medicine for her mother's heart condition. School supplies for her niece. A repair for her motorbike that she needed to get to work. "I hate asking," she'd always say, her eyes downcast with what looked like genuine shame, "if there was any other way." But there never was any other way, and I found myself saying yes every time. Not because I was stupid, but because being needed felt so much better than being alone. Each time I handed her cash, I felt important, useful, like I was building something permanent with someone who valued me. Then came the night she didn't come to bed. I woke up around 3 a.m. and reached for her, finding cold sheets instead of warm skin. I padded through the condo and found her in the guest room, curled under a thin blanket, fully clothed. "Couldn't sleep?" she murmured when I touched her shoulder. "Didn't want to wake you with my tossing and turning." It seemed reasonable, considerate even. But as weeks passed, she spent more nights in that guest room than in our bed. "Just tired," she'd say when I asked. "Work has been stressful." When I suggested she quit her job, told her I could take care of us both, she shook her head quickly. "I need to work, Martin. I need to feel independent." I admired her for it, told myself it showed strength and character. But late at night, staring at the ceiling alone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away from me, grain by grain, like sand through my fingers. I wasn't snooping. I need to make that clear, even now, even knowing how it all ended. I was helping her clean the living room because she'd been working so hard, looked so tired lately. Her purse was on the coffee table, and when I lifted it to dust underneath, the whole thing tipped over. Contents scattered across the glass surface like evidence I wasn't supposed to see. Lipstick, keys, receipts, breath mints, and an envelope. Thick, cream-colored paper with a hotel logo I recognized but couldn't place. Inside, I could see the corner of what looked like cash. A lot of cash. And underneath it, a plastic key card. My hands shook as I picked up the envelope, my heart hammering against my ribs. The hotel was the Andaman Pearl, one of the luxury resorts up the coast where rooms cost more per night than I spent in a week. Why would Sampriya have cash and a key card for a place like that? I heard her footsteps coming back from the kitchen and quickly stuffed everything back into her purse, but the damage was done. The questions were already eating at me like acid. "You're quiet," she said, setting down 2 cups of coffee and settling beside me on the couch. "Everything okay?" For a moment, I considered staying silent, pretending I hadn't seen anything, but the envelope felt like it was burning a hole in my consciousness. "Sampriya," I said carefully, "I accidentally knocked over your purse. There was an envelope from the Andaman Pearl, with cash and a room key." I watched her face change, saw something flicker across her features too quickly to identify. Fear, guilt, relief. "Oh," she said softly, her hands twisting in her lap. "I can explain that." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. "I'm listening," I said, though part of me didn't want to hear whatever came next. She looked up at me with tears gathering in her dark eyes, and my resolve nearly crumbled. "It's my cousin, Nim. She's in trouble. Bad trouble." The story came out in broken pieces. Nim was seeing a man, an older Thai businessman who owned several hotels. He'd been kind at first, generous, but recently he'd become possessive, violent. She's scared to leave him because he has connections, power. But she needed somewhere safe to go, somewhere he wouldn't find her. Sompriya's voice was barely a whisper. "So I got her a room at the Pearl, somewhere nice where she could feel safe for a few days. The cash was for expenses, food, whatever she needed." It sounded plausible. It sounded like exactly the kind of thing Sampriya would do for family. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "I would have helped." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, looking suddenly very young. "Because I didn't want to get her in more trouble. If word got back to him that foreigners were involved, he might get angrier. Do something worse." The explanation made sense. It fit with everything I knew about her fierce loyalty to family. But something cold and suspicious had woken up in my chest, something that whispered that the story was too neat, too convenient. "I'm sorry I didn't trust you enough to tell you," she continued. "I was trying to protect everyone. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. So I pushed down that suspicious voice and pulled her into my arms instead. I'm sorry for doubting you," I said into her hair, hating myself for the relief I felt at having an explanation. "You were protecting your family." "I understand that." She cried harder then, her body shaking against mine. "You're such a good man, Martin. Too good for someone like me." The words should have reassured me, but they felt strange, wrong somehow, like she was saying goodbye instead of "I love you." That night, she packed a small bag. "I need some space to think," she said, not meeting my eyes. "About Nim, about everything. Maybe stay with my mother for a while." "For how long?" I asked, but she just shrugged. "I don't know. A few weeks, maybe." She kissed me goodbye at the door, soft and lingering, like she was memorizing the feel of it. After she left, I sat in my empty condo, surrounded by the ghost of her presence. Her coffee cup still on the table, her pillow still indented from the night before, the guest room where she'd been sleeping more often than in our bed. I told myself this was normal. Couples needed space sometimes. But as days turned into a week, then 2 weeks, I felt something inside me beginning to fracture. I reread her old text messages obsessively, looking for clues I'd missed. Called her mother's number only to be told she wasn't there. Left voicemails that went unanswered. The silence was driving me slowly, quietly, insane. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of waking up alone and going to bed alone and wondering if I'd imagined the whole relationship. Then my phone buzzed at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. "Can we talk? I miss you." My heart leaped like I was 25 again. I texted back immediately. "Of course. When? Where?" "Tomorrow night. That little restaurant near the beach where we had our first date." I spent the entire next day planning what I'd say, how I'd welcome her back without seeming desperate, how I'd show her I understood about family obligations and space and all the complicated things that came with loving someone. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at our old table, wearing the blue dress I'd bought her for her birthday. She looked beautiful and tired and somehow fragile, like she'd been carrying something too heavy for too long. "Hi," she said softly when I sat down, her hand reaching across the table to touch mine. The contact sent electricity through my whole body. "Hi yourself," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "How have you been?" "Miserable," she admitted with a small laugh. "I missed you so much, Martin." "Missed us." The words were like oxygen to a drowning man. "I missed you too, more than I knew was possible." We talked for 2 hours, falling back into our old rhythm like no time had passed at all. She told me about helping her cousin find a new apartment, about her mother's ongoing health issues, about how empty her days had felt without me in them. "I think I needed to miss you to realize how much you mean to me," she said, her thumb tracing circles on my palm. "I want to try again." "If you'll have me," I would have agreed to anything she asked. "Of course I'll have you. You're everything to me, Sombria." She smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from her all evening, and leaned across the small table to kiss me softly on the lips. "There is one thing," she said as we prepared to leave, her voice dropping to that apologetic tone I'd learned to recognize. "My brother, he's in some legal trouble. Nothing serious, just a misunderstanding with his employer, but he needs money for a lawyer, if you could help." The request hit me like cold water, but I pushed down my disappointment. This was what love looked like, wasn't it? Supporting each other through difficult times? "How much does he need?" I asked, already reaching for my wallet. 15,000 baht. I know it's a lot, but I wouldn't ask if there was any other way. I handed her the cash without counting it, watching her face flood with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Martin. You have no idea what this means to my family." But as she tucked the money into her purse, something dark and suspicious whispered in my ear, something that sounded suspiciously like Greg's warnings. Something that made me do the thing I'd never imagined myself capable of. "I should go," she said, checking her phone. "Early day tomorrow." "I'll walk you to your motorbike," I offered, but she shook her head quickly. "It's okay. Stay, finish your beer. I know you like to sit and think after dinner." She kissed me goodbye, promised to call tomorrow, and disappeared into the evening crowd. I waited exactly 5 minutes before following her. I stayed far enough back that she wouldn't notice me, my heart pounding with shame and terror and desperate need to know the truth. She didn't go to her motorbike. She walked 3 blocks down a side street I'd never seen before and entered a bar with no name, just red neon lights and loud music spilling onto the sidewalk. Through the window, I watched her scan the crowd like she was looking for someone specific. Then I saw her face light up, saw her practically run toward a table in the back corner, toward a man. Young, Thai, handsome in the way I'd never been. I watched her throw her arms around his neck, watched her kiss him on the mouth like she meant it, watched her sit in his lap like she belonged there, like I had never existed at all. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I kept seeing her face when she spotted that man, the joy that spread across her features like sunrise, the way she'd kissed him. Not the careful, measured kisses she gave me, but something wild and desperate and real. I replayed every conversation we'd had, every explanation she'd given for her absences, every request for money, the hotel envelope, the late nights in the guest room, the phone calls that went unanswered. It all made perfect sense now, in the cruelest possible way. I deleted her number from my phone at 3 a.m., drunk on whiskey and self-loathing, blocked her on the messaging app we used to send good morning texts and photos of sunsets, threw away the few things she'd left at my condo, a hair tie, a paperback book in Thai, a pair of earrings I'd bought her for our 2-month anniversary. I wanted to erase every trace of her, every reminder of how thoroughly I'd been played, but I couldn't delete the memories, couldn't unsee her head on my shoulder that first night on the beach, couldn't unfeel the warmth of her saying, "my husband," to her friend. For 2 months, I lived like a ghost. I stopped going to the places we'd frequented together, stopped cooking the Thai dishes she'd taught me, started drinking more than I should and sleeping less than I needed. Greg tried to check on me, but I wasn't ready for his "I told you so" sympathy. I wasn't ready to admit how completely I'd been fooled by someone who'd probably never cared about me at all. I was angry, but not at her. I was angry at myself for being so desperate for love that I'd ignored every red flag, explained away every inconsistency, paid for every story without question. Then my phone buzzed on a Thursday morning. An unknown number, but I recognized the words immediately. "Hi, Martin. Just checking if you're okay. Haven't heard from you in a while." My finger hovered over the delete button for a full minute. The smart thing, the self-preserving thing, would be to pretend I'd never seen the message. But loneliness is a powerful drug, and I'd been going through withdrawal for months. Against every instinct screaming at me to walk away, I typed back, "I'm fine, how are you?" The response came immediately. "Can we meet? Just for coffee? I'd like to see you." I knew it was a mistake, even as I agreed to meet her at the same coffee shop where we'd had our first real conversation all those months ago. She was already there when I arrived, looking smaller somehow, less radiant than I remembered. Still beautiful, but with something worn around the edges. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat across from her, the same table where she'd first told me about her mother, her niece, her family responsibilities. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything we weren't saying. "I know you saw me that night," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "At the bar. With Crit." The admission hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting it. "So why are we here, Sompriya? What's the point of this?" She looked up at me with tears in her eyes, and for a moment I felt that old instinct to comfort her, to make everything okay. I wanted to explain, to tell you the truth. What truth? That everything between us was a lie? My voice came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't apologize. "Not everything," she said softly. "My feelings for you, they were real, complicated, but real." "Were?" I asked, and hated how much hope I heard in my own voice. She looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "Did you ever love me?" I asked the question that had been eating at me for months. "Really love me, not just what I could give you?" The silence stretched so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I cared about you, Martin. More than I expected to. You're a good man. A kind man." "That's not what I asked." She wiped her eyes with a napkin, smearing her makeup slightly. "I'm in a difficult situation. With money, with family, With Crit, he's complicated, sometimes good, sometimes not. But we have history. And I was what? A solution to your money problems? The words tasted bitter in my mouth. It wasn't like that, not entirely. But she couldn't look at me when she said it, and we both knew what that meant. There is one more thing, she said, her voice dropping to that familiar apologetic tone. I'm in a bit of trouble. Just a small loan to get through the next few weeks. If you could help. The audacity of it took my breath away. After everything, after the lies and the cheating and the months of silence, she still thought she could ask me for money. Still thought I was that desperate, that foolish, that easy to manipulate. I pulled out my wallet and placed 5,000 baht on the table between us. Not for her. Not because I believed whatever story she was about to tell me. But for myself. For closure. For the final proof that this had never been about love. Thank you, she said, reaching for the money with relief flooding her face. I knew you'd understand. You always understand. I stood up without another word, leaving my untouched coffee growing cold on the table. She didn't call after me, didn't follow, didn't even look up as I walked away, and that told me everything I needed to know about what I'd really meant to her. I moved to Krabi the next week. Smaller town, fewer tourists, fewer memories lurking around every corner. Rented a simple bungalow near the water where I could hear the waves at night instead of the traffic and bar music that had become the soundtrack to my heartbreak. I stopped going to expat hangouts, stopped trying to meet people, stopped pretending I was looking for anything other than peace. For the first time since Sarah left me, I was alone by choice instead of circumstance. It felt like learning to breathe again. The mornings became my favorite time. I'd wake before sunrise and walk the empty beach, watching the sky change colors over the limestone cliffs. No agenda, no destination, just the rhythm of waves and the feeling of sand under my bare feet. I started cooking again, not the Thai dishes Sompriya had taught me, but simple Western food that tasted like comfort instead of memory. Eggs and toast, roast chicken with vegetables, shepherd's pie that reminded me of Sunday dinners with my mom decades ago, food that belonged to me, not to us. Greg called every few weeks, checking in without being pushy about it. You sound better, mate, he said during one of our conversations. Clearer, if that makes sense. I feel clearer, I admitted, like I can see things I couldn't see before. What kind of things? Red flags I ignored, questions I didn't ask. The difference between being needed and being used. He was quiet for a moment. That's hard-won wisdom. Expensive wisdom. Yeah, well, some lessons you can only learn by living them. I didn't regret helping her family, if that's what I'd actually been doing, but I regretted lying to myself about what our relationship really was. The rain became my companion during the monsoon season. I'd sit on my covered porch with a book and a cup of tea, listening to the water drum against the roof and windows. No television, no internet most days. Just the sound of weather and my own thoughts. I discovered I actually enjoyed my own company when I wasn't desperately trying to fill the silence with someone else's voice. I could spend hours reading, thinking, just existing, without needing validation from anyone else. I never heard from Sompriya again after that final coffee. No more emergency requests, no more family crises that required my immediate financial attention. The silence confirmed what I'd already known but hadn't wanted to admit. I'd been a solution to her problems, not a person she genuinely cared about. The realization hurt less than I expected it to. Maybe because I'd finally stopped fighting it, stopped trying to rewrite the story into something it had never been. Maybe because I'd learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. Sometimes I still thought about her, not with longing anymore, but with a kind of detached curiosity. I wondered if she was still with Crit, still working at the hotel, still helping her family with money from men who mistook need for love. I wondered if she ever thought about me, if she felt any guilt for the months of deception, if she understood how close I'd come to giving her everything I had. But these were idle thoughts, like wondering about characters in a book I'd finished reading. The hardest part wasn't missing her. The hardest part was forgiving myself for being so desperate to be wanted that I'd ignored every instinct telling me something was wrong. I'd been a 66-year-old man acting like a lovesick teenager, throwing money at problems that weren't really problems, believing stories that fell apart the moment you looked at them closely. I'd wanted so badly to be the hero of someone's story that I'd let myself become the fool instead. One evening, about 6 months after moving to Krabi, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when my neighbor stopped by. Mrs. Somchai was in her 70s, a widow who'd lived in the same house for 40 years. She spoke enough English for us to have simple conversations about the weather, the fishing boats, the way the light changed depending on the season. "You look peaceful now," she said, settling into the chair beside mine. "When you first moved here, you looked like a man carrying stones." "I was," I said. "Heavy ones." She nodded like she understood. "Time and ocean water. They wash away most things, if you let them." I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. About letting things wash away instead of clinging to them. About the difference between healing and just waiting for the pain to stop. I started volunteering at a local school, teaching English to kids who giggled at my accent and corrected my pronunciation of Thai words. Their joy was uncomplicated, their affection freely given without agenda. Being around them reminded me what genuine connection felt like, how it differed from manipulation disguised as intimacy. I didn't hate Sompriya. That surprised me more than anything. I should have hated her for the lies, the deception, the months of making me feel crazy for doubting what my eyes were telling me. But hate requires a kind of energy I didn't want to spend anymore. She'd done what she felt she needed to do to survive, to take care of the people who mattered to her. I just hadn't been one of those people, no matter how much I'd wanted to be. Understanding that didn't make it hurt less, but it made it make sense. The truth was, I'd come to Thailand looking for peace after my divorce, and in a strange way, I'd found it. Not the way I'd expected, not with the person I'd thought would give it to me, but peace nonetheless. I'd learned I could be alone without being lonely. I'd learned the difference between love and need, between kindness and manipulation, between helping someone and being used. These were expensive lessons, paid for with money and pride and months of heartbreak, but they were mine now, part of who I'd become. As I write this, 2 years have passed since that last coffee with Sompriya. I'm still in Krabi, still taking my morning walks on the beach, still cooking dinner for one and finding it enough. I date occasionally, but carefully now, with eyes wide open instead of clouded by loneliness. I know what red flags look like. I know the sound of someone asking for help versus someone looking for a solution to their financial problems. I know the difference between being loved and being needed. Sometimes tourists ask me for advice about relationships in Thailand. I tell them what Greg once told me: slow down, pay attention. Remember that desperation makes you stupid, and kindness without boundaries makes you a target. I tell them that loneliness is not a good reason to ignore your instincts, that being needed is not the same as being loved, that some people will take everything you're willing to give and still ask for more. Most of them don't listen, just like I didn't listen. Some lessons you can only learn by living them. But I also tell them that Thailand can heal you if you let it. Not through finding someone to complete you, but through learning to be complete on your own. Through morning walks and evening rain and the simple pleasure of a meal you cooked yourself. Through children who laugh at your jokes and neighbors who understand that sometimes the best conversations happen in silence. Through the gradual realization that you don't need saving, that you never did. I gave Sompriya everything I had, and it still wasn't enough. But that wasn't because I wasn't enough. It was because she was looking for something I couldn't give her, something no amount of money or devotion or desperate love could provide. She was looking for a way out of her circumstances, and I was looking for a way back into love. We were both using each other, in our own ways. The difference was, I thought it was real. The sunset looks different now than it did that first night on the beach with her head on my shoulder. Less desperate, less loaded with meaning and hope and the weight of all my expectations. Just beautiful for what it is. Nothing more, nothing less. Tomorrow there will be another one, and I'll watch it alone, and that will be enough. Maybe that's what peace really looks like. Not finding someone to share your life with, but learning that your life is worth living even when you're the only one watching the sky change colors. The waves keep coming, patient and persistent, washing away footprints and carrying away the debris of high tide, time and ocean water, like Mrs. Somchai said. They wash away most things, if you let them. I'm learning to let them.